Today it's June 5th, 2020, and is it a Thursday or a Friday, Kathy?
It's a Friday, Deliris.
Friday.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
So today we're going to be talking with retired Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Lowry Gallowitz.
That's it. That's a long name, but that's it.
I know. But she was, she served in the Air Force, and now she is the founder and president of Vanguard Veteran. And the reason because I decided to bring Kathy is because I just retired not long ago, and I'm kind of like looking for, to educate myself of what to do and how to do things after I retired from the military, because after 29 years, it's kind of like, 29 years, it's kind of like you were married to the service and you kind of like feel out of place, with just the regular population. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, Kathy.
Okay, but first I'd like to know, how long have you been retired?
From the military, I retired July 19 of 2019. So this July 19 will be 1 year.
Well, thank you for your service, Deliris. And I know that the first year post-military service is big transition. So I hope we can chat about that a little bit more.
For sure.
All right. So thanks again for having me. I appreciate you finding me on LinkedIn and taking interest in me and Vanguard Veteran. My story is, Cliff Note version, if you will, is that I was born into a Navy family and followed my dad's Navy career around the world. Of most interest, I went to a French-speaking preschool in Paris, France, and then graduated from high school in Keflavik, Iceland. That was a huge transition for me because I moved in the middle of my junior year in high school, where I was one of 400 and a varsity cheerleader, which is big stuff for young girls, right? And then moved to graduate from a high school, a Department of Defense high school with 30 students, right?
Oh, wow.
So that was a big transition, a great eye-opener, very educational. My father paid for nursing school. So my first choice career was Air Force nursing. I spent about 6 years on active duty. And then my number is the same number as yours, Deliris. I spent 29 years.
Oh, wow.
In the Air Force. It was active duty, reserve. I was in the reserve for, 8 or 9 years, something like that. But the lion's share of my career, 14 years full-time in the Air National Guard. Okay. I spent overall 20 years full-time in uniform, and then an additional 9 years part-time in either the Guard or Reserve. Okay. The crowning achievement of my career was to develop a statewide outreach office for the Ohio National Guard in response to 9/11. So what we did was educate and engage civilians in support of troops and their families. And that effort certainly benefited service members from all branches because, in the Guard, it's only Army and Air. Mm-hmm. And it also benefited service members from all statuses of service, right? Mm-hmm. So we reached out to employers, healthcare providers, attorneys, educators, leaders of diverse communities, and clergy. The focus was on civilians, educating and engaging them in support of troops and their family. So I retired about 3 years ago in 2016. The following year started Vanguard Veteran.
Awesome.
Okay.
Now, what does Vanguard Veteran do? I mean, what is their mission?
It's essentially a continuation of the work I did as the Director of Community Outreach for the Ohio National Guard. Vanguard Veteran is me. As a consultant, trainer, and speaker, what I do is equip civilians to become veteran champions. You say, what's a veteran champion, right? All right. So I contend that a veteran champion is a civilian who promotes quality of life, workforce, and community by developing mutually beneficial, that's the key word, mutually beneficial activities, services, and maybe resources that create the win-win. So my motto is join the Veteran Champion movement and be a part of the win. Because I believe that when our citizenry has an opportunity to get to know us, learn of our honor, courage, and sacrifice, and just get to know our values-based approach and our commitments, that also helps improve the quality of life of any citizen. And that when the citizen takes time to get to know us, they can offer us a lot of help, right? Help broaden our network. And so Vanguard Veteran is promoting a movement, one citizen at a time, be it a neighbor or maybe a Supreme Court justice or a mayor of a city. But what I focus in on mostly is employers and volunteer faith community leaders. So the movement is very broad. Any citizen, when I speak to try to promote participation, I make it a very broad message. As a trainer and a consultant, I speak mostly to employers and faith community leaders, volunteer and clergy.
Okay. Now, let me ask you something. Whenever you were on your 29 years on the Air Force Reserve, correct, you say?
I finished up in the Air National Guard.
Okay. So whenever you were with the Air National Guard, do you feel like civilians understood the force?
So what I'm hearing you ask me about is this notion of the military-civilian divide, right? I wish that if I had the energy that I could go get a PhD in that very concept. But the truth is, I don't have the energy. So I believe that, yes, that there is a military-civilian divide. There's a lack of knowledge on our citizenry, on our citizenry's behalf. And so why do I think that? Well, some of the research shows that the Bush Institute said that upwards of about 80% of veterans feel that our citizens don't understand some of the challenges they faced in Iraq and Afghanistan. Other research shows that 55% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans feel disconnected from mainstream America. So the military-civilian divide, there's a lack of understanding, there's a lack of awareness. I mean, I think people are well-meaning and really appreciate and trust their military, but they're not sure really how to support the military. And so that's what we focused in on in the community outreach program in the Ohio National Guard. And also that's what Vanguard Veteran does on a smaller scale. Does that answer your question? Yes. And I have nothing but profound respect and appreciation for our citizens, because we are so lucky to have, 40,000 nonprofits across the nation that support veterans. And we have a high level of trust. I think for many, many years in a row, the Gallup survey has shown that the military has some of the highest levels of trust, if not the highest level of trust of any organization in our community. But there's a gap, Deliris, there's a gap between appreciating and trusting the military and helping our service members come, if you will, all the way home, helping them integrate into civilian society in many, many ways.
Do you think that we're a complex population?
That's a really good question. Oh, I love the way you framed that. Yes, ma'am, I would say.
But why is that so?
Well, military culture is a very real thing. And I know that because there's a program called STAR Behavioral Health that is going out and educating behavioral health providers across the nations. And I am trained to teach military culture to these behavioral health providers, but I also train it to anybody who wants to know. And when I went through their training program, oh my gosh, my eyes opened up as to why maybe I think the way I do, because everything about me has been influenced by military service. I grew up in it. I served in it. I've had 2 military husbands, and my son is an Army National Guard soldier, right? So I've seen it from a lot of perspectives. Are we complex? Yes, but I think that complexity stems from the mindset and the values that we learn in military service that are different from the mindset and values of our larger population, the civilian population. We're a great values-based group of people, but you know, like I'm explaining in the book I'm about to publish, we can get in our own way. We can get in our own way, right? Right? Okay. So my book is called Beyond Thank You for Your Service.
That's a nice title.
Thank you. You know, so many times, how many times have you experienced being in uniform, let's say in a restaurant, and somebody comes up to you and either they'll pay for your meal, or, you know, you're walking down the street and people say, thank you for your service. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, right? You know, our Vietnam veterans didn't have that, bless their soul.
Yep.
Right? I mean, just so tragic, you know? So we are really lucky to have that public sentiment and public demonstration of thank you, okay? And that's a wonderful thing, and I'm very grateful for that. But you know what? It goes beyond that, right? In the book, I'm showcasing a gentleman named Dr. Charles Hickey, who was the Ohio State Medical Association president and a delegate to the American Medical Association. And because of his involvement in the Ohio National Guard healthcare outreach, he came from having no knowledge about the needs of the force to having a great deal of knowledge, and then becoming an advocate or a veteran champion on our behalf. And I tell you about Dr. Hickey. He and the American Medical Association ended up sending resolutions to Congress to try to promote more access to care and maybe even some funding issues for civilian physicians. And you know what Dr. Hickey said?
What did he say?
He said, taking care of veterans is more than lip service, right? So that's a beautiful story and a beautiful demonstration of how we can educate a citizen, an influential citizen in this case, and how they can get engaged. And through his work, he was certainly improving the quality of life of our service members, veterans, and their families by getting more doctors involved in caring for TRICARE beneficiaries. And he was certainly also improving our communities, because if the soldier's healthier, right, they can do more in their community, they can work better in their civilian job or in their military job. So that's a prime example of how educating a citizen who had no knowledge, who had no understanding of the needs of our force, what they can do to really make a difference. And it's this, my favorite line is, being a veteran champion is not rocket science.
It's not.
It's people science.
Yes.
It's
but
people science.
You know, it's like you said, you know, people have to volunteer and get engaged and get educated and understand us, because we're not better than anybody else. We're just a different culture.
Yes.
That's all it is.
And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this based on, you know, up until the age of 35, I lived in at least 20 different communities. When me and my first husband finally left active duty and we established roots in Ohio, I was having these revelations of, gee, I never experienced this or that. And I thought, maybe I've had a different life experience, right? And so the more I thought about this, the more I thought about the concept of veteran champions. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, who is really taking the responsibility, and or whose responsibility is it to educate our citizens about the differences of military culture and the needs of those who protect and defend our freedom? Whose job is that, Deliris? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I try to do my best, right, to educate my neighbors, because my neighbors, the only thing that they know is whatever they see on the news. You know, I think that it's each individual soldier, in my opinion, because we live it, we breathe it.
Yes.
You know, politicians and, you know, the members of Congress and Senate, I mean, they've never been, the majority of them, they have never served their country on that capacity.
Yes. And I really, that was kind of really a rhetorical question, right? Because, you know, the Department of Defense and the VA do the best they can in this space, okay? But there really isn't a separate entity that helps make this happen. And oh, by the way, many people, this may be a gross overgeneralization, but I would submit to you that you and I are probably more on the outgoing side, more on the risk taker side, more on the entrepreneurial side than many, if not most, of our service members. Okay.
But it's because of the stigma, the precautions, the consequences, you know. For many years, you know, I kept my mouth shut, you know, and I was kind of like, I guess that this is the way it is, you know. And then, you know, you could look in the mirror and you're like, you know, this is not right.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the hierarchy of the military,
the top leadership,
perpetuates sort of speak when spoken to, right? Okay. Now, I grew up that way in a military family. All right. My father was a very strict disciplinarian, which is very common for military officers, right? Okay. And so, yes, it takes a good leader who leads through influence and not position or power to promote that voice within the service. Okay. So this is going to transition into our next topic about transition, personal development, and leadership, right? And so that's one of the challenges for us as we transition, is to figure out, who am I? What do I want? What is my purpose? What are my strengths, right?
And sometimes you don't find that out until later on in life.
Yes. And the only way you find that out is through a lot of hard work, rolling up your sleeves, doing a lot of self-introspection, taking personality tests, hiring a coach. You know, in order to learn, you have to learning can be painful. And most of us only learn when we're in pain and when we're ready to learn. And that readiness more often than not stems from pain, stems from making choices that get us into painful situations. So that's another real disconnect that I believe that the military does poorly. The Department of Defense is revamping. In 2012, President Obama said, we have not overhauled the transition assistance program in at least 20 years. And now we're going to do that. We're going to start earlier. We're going to really do our best to make sure that then when someone separates from the military, that they have a good idea what they want to do, and they are really prepared, because right now we mostly are not, unless you have go ahead.
I mean, I have a lot of friends that they retired from the military and they're lost. You know, they don't know what to do. like the skills in the military, they don't know how to transition them into civilian life.
Yes.
And then, they go into unemployment, and then a couple of years pass, and then, it takes them a little while to kind of like get a grip.
And so for most of us to figure out what your life's calling is, so that you're aligning your strengths and purpose with your profession or your job, that's where you're going to be most successful. That's where you're going to find the most meaning and the most joy. But guess what? No one figures that out for you. We don't learn that in academic programs. We don't learn that in the military, okay? That is a journey of self-discovery and needs to start real early on, because in civilian life, there's no roadmap that tells you how to go up the ladder, right? In the military, it's like, well, if you do this school, if you go to that course, if you have this job, then there's a good chance you might get promoted, right? But everything's so messy and so unstructured out in civilian life. So, this is a journey that has to start way before it's time to take off your uniform. And we have agencies that provide support, but those are more often than not focused on tactics, like what's your resume look like, it's really an inside job.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that I didn't face that as much because I was in the Army Reserves, right?
Yeah.
So in reality, I had a civilian career. It was kind of like, I go play military and then I come play civilian, and then I always go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that for full-time military folks,
yes,
whenever they have a skill set, that's all they think. Okay, so this is what I did in the military, so this is what I'm going to do whenever I get out. And they don't take any risk. They don't grow into other possibilities. They're not creative. They don't take initiative.
Well, and I believe that encouraging people to dig deep, to take risks, to take initiative, all those things you just said, those are some coaching things that we could help our service members look at prior to taking off the uniform. I want to highlight a few things. First of all, one of the biggest gaps for those who are on active duty, okay, is that they leave active service and have next to no civilian network. When they jump into even if they go back home after serving 4 to 6 years or 26 years, that civilian network is not what it used to be. So they're starting from scratch, right? I don't know about you, but the best things in life come from having a strong support system or network, right? Someone who can promote you or speak to your reputation and or recommend you to a prospective employer, right? Mm-hmm. People who serve full-time military oftentimes do not have that. So that's where a veteran champion comes in. Hey, I see you're just back from service. You just moved in next door. How are you doing? I'd like to get to know you. How can I support you? How can I open up my network and help you transition? And then one other piece of data is that research shows that 55% of service members are more than willing to do a different job than the job they did in the military.
They burn out.
Okay. And I would contend that they're great learners, highly adaptable, and used to, and from a healthcare perspective, do one, see one, teach one, right? That's what we do in the military. You have a lot of different jobs. You're trained in your new job, and you go and you perform it. And that's really why we have the best armed forces in the world, is because we have all kinds of training and we know how to adapt and overcome.
We were talking a little bit before about, the LLC that I have with the horses, providing therapy for individuals that need it. And then I decided to to do my candidacy for one of the labor unions. And I just got my packet so I can start, getting more involved, because I think that people that have served in the military, they have a lot of experience that they bring up to the table. They have been, I'm like you, I travel the world. I was engaging with different cultures, and you learn obviously the good and the bad, you kind of like try to, push the bad to the side and kind of like hold on to the good. But, this new generation that we have now, everything is on the phone, everything is on the computer. There's no interaction with people. Like the social skills are kind of like getting out of the window, if that makes any sense. And then I say, well, the only thing that they can say is no. And then I have my post 9/11 educational benefits, and then I can go back to school and take my EDD, maybe on leadership or management, and then teach at the university. So.
Well, I'm proud of you for, putting your hat in the ring to try to be a representative at the labor union. Did I hear you right?
Yes.
Yeah, you go for it, girl. And that
it would be hard.
No, now listen, that's another example of what I think military experience teaches us.
Yes.
It teaches us to be willing to step up, to take risks, and to have confidence, because through our military experience, we really have, and we really do, overcome a lot of challenges. We know how to face challenge head on, and we have the resiliency to persevere through it and get outcomes. So I'm really proud of you for starting not one, but 2 nonprofits, right?
Yes.
And doing this interview. I mean, you're a self-starter and a risk taker, and people like you will change the world. And so many of our service members have these qualities, and, unfortunately, I think they're sometimes just kept under a bushel, And so I love what you're doing to try to encourage and empower veterans to go out and use their skill sets, their values, their commitment to service to really contribute. So I'm always looking at data, and trying to find research that portrays what I want to share. And so there's another research study I want you to know about.
Okay.
In 2015, the American Enterprise Institute looked at 11 criteria of civic participation and found that veterans were more civic-minded than non-veterans.
Wow.
The name of this article that I read was "Veterans Are Broke No More." Because you said it earlier, Deliris, in that, oftentimes what the media perpetuates is the stigma and stereotypes that veterans are broken. Okay? And yes, 11 to 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have PTSD, according to the VA. According to the VA, probably about 30% of Vietnam veterans have had PTSD in their lifetime. All right? But you are more likely in this society to meet a civilian with PTSD than you are a veteran, because when 100 of us serve, there's a whole lot less veterans than there are other American citizens. And 2/3 of our population experiences some sort of trauma. So it's not combat that necessarily, you don't have to go to combat to have PTSD. You can be survived a car accident. You can, have had some lawsuit problems. You could be a survivor of domestic abuse or sexual assault, right? So
for the longest time, they put everything like it was just trauma from combat. And if you really look at the workers' comp with Department of Labor, if you have trauma and it's not related to an injury, like a car accident or a shooting or something, then they don't cover it. It's not a covered workplace. So, I have taken the risk to go to members of Congress and Senate and, you know, speak up, because I think that whenever you have individuals that have been victims of that same issue, you know, they can understand a little bit better how did that affected them, you know. And I mean, and I don't think that I am an activist. I don't call myself an activist. I think that I call myself an advocate.
Right on.
You know, of civil rights, because there's a lot of civil rights that are right, but there's others that, you know, we really would like, you know, we really have to, you know, to look at the individual issues, because, you know, we have been protecting wrongdoing for a very, very long time. That's in the civilian world, in the military, you know. I mean, I mentioned a couple of, you know, like, whenever we were talking earlier, I mentioned to you that there were, I want to say like 4 warrant officers at the Pentagon level that came out and agree on and accepted that there was racism and discrimination in the military, you know. So I know that that's going to open another can of worms, you know, because now, you know, obviously Secretary Esper from the Department of Defense have to answer to that. And so I don't know. But, you know,
well, let me make this comment. Yes. Okay. There is no place for discrimination anywhere, but I'm here to tell you, it should not exist when the core of our missions depend upon trust between teammates. Yes. So discrimination of any sort is just completely wrong and unfounded in the military service. And the other thing I believe strongly in is that we are a profession of arms founded on core values. Okay, our core values: courage, honor, integrity, service before self, excellence. Those, any kind of discriminatory behavior does not align with who we are and who we want to be and need to be for the American public. So
it shouldn't.
It's a disgrace for there to be any kind of discrimination in the armed forces. And I think, like I said earlier, I know you've had some struggles, and I'm really sorry about that. That's just so wrong. But, you know, in my experience, fortunately, I have not had those experiences and have.
You're lucky, very lucky.
Well, and I mean, and I also want to make sure that I highlight that, you know, we are trained within the military. I know the active duty armor has gender relations training. The active duty Army teaches soldiers how to relate to one another, male and female. Okay. In my experience in the Air National Guard, we had, I think it was called human relations training or some sort of, you know, EEO training, right? So that if you felt you were being discriminated or treated inappropriately, frankly, you were given words that you could use to try to nip it in the bud. And so I used that training a few times when I felt things were inappropriate, and really it evaporated, right? So, you know, people are people, and people do knucklehead things. And, you know,
they're humans, I guess.
Yeah.
The problem is whenever there's no consequences, you know, because then others watch the behavior and they, you know, they think that it's okay and they can get away with it, and their behavior continue.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of like, I compare like a bag of apples, right? You get a bag of apples to make a potato salad, and then you have one bad apple. And if you don't take it out of the bag, it contaminates the other one. So then you cannot use your apples for the potato salad.
Well, and I like that. I was also part of the sexual assault response program right when it initiated back in 2006 and launched it at the 121st Air Refueling Wing at Rickenbacker in Columbus, Ohio. And, you know, we would talk about how, you know, just offhanded comments about women or using the F-bomb or, you know, just things that seemingly are innocent, right?
Yes.
How they snowball and perpetuate concepts that are not healthy for good, you know, gender relationships and or racial ethnicity relationships, using slang terms that are disrespectful for anybody is not at all what the profession of arms are about. So there does need to be consequences. And, you know, Deliris, you said your whole career was in the reserves, right? Okay. Now, no disrespect intended, okay, but the reserve component, reserve and guard, sometimes has less discipline and military customs and courtesies than the active duty force. And I know that from personal experience. Now, that doesn't excuse any lack of professionalism, okay? But the cultures are very different. But the cultures are very different in the Army and in the Air Force and in the Marines, right? You know, every service has its own culture. Every service has its own subcultures, right? Yes. And so we have a lot of learning to do. And you know what? We're a microcosm of our larger society. Yeah. And I tell you what, I was never more proud to wear this uniform, Deliris, than when Congress said, you will go out and teach every single one of your military members how to be an effective bystander, to do reports, and to, I think that was it, you know, be a bystander to try to prevent sexual assault, and then what to know what to do about it if you have a concern, or if you know that it occurred. And you know, the military started that, right? And then 10 years later, we had the Me Too movement. And now more and more civilian companies, as I understand it, are doing more and more sexual assault prevention training. Yes. So, you know, we're making progress, but we still...
Well, no, the other thing that I have seen is, because I did have a soldier that was sexually assaulted, and she's actually writing a book. And I know that she will watch, you know, this interview later on.
Thank you for writing a book.
So, but there's other people that take advantage of situations, and they make false allegations about sexual assault.
Yeah.
You know, and the service have not educated, you know, the military culture regarding to the consequences that come after whenever you do that, you know, because you're playing with people's careers.
Absolutely.
You know, that's libel, slander, defamation of character, and that can cause a lot of damage. You know.
But what, again, there's no easy answers to that, right? We have to believe the victim. That is the right thing to do. And shame on any victim who is falsely reporting something. That is horrible. So wrong. So wrong. So wrong. But you know, it's like a pendulum, right? You have to start somewhere, and then we'll figure out, okay, what do we do for people who are wrongly accused? I don't know. I'm not that smart, but I don't know. It's very tragic. Can I shift the conversation to something I really want to highlight?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I know you're a first responder, and I know you have an LLC based on healing for anybody, for veterans and civilians, right?
Yes.
Through equine therapy, right? Okay. And so you're very sensitive to some of the, if you will, emotional injuries that can come along with military service. So I want to talk about an organization called Opus Peace, Soul Injuries, and the Fallen Comrades Ceremony. Okay. So Opus Peace was founded by a group of 5 or 6 nurses who worked in the Tampa Hospice VA. Over a 30-year career, founder Deborah Grassman, an advanced practice hospice nurse, helped 10,000 veterans at their end of life. Wow. 10,000. Now this is going to make you cry. What this group of nurses found over 30 years was that if veterans, primarily combat veterans, if veterans had unmourned loss and unforgiven guilt and shame, that they had a more restless end-of-life experience. Once the loss could be mourned and they could forgive self or others for things that they could have done, should have done, thought they should have done, in most cases were helpless around, that when those things were acknowledged, just acknowledged, because most of our veterans don't talk about what happened to them in combat for the rest of their life. Unless
they bundle it up.
They bottle it up. That's right. And so they coined the phrase soul injury, different from moral injury. The VA says a moral injury is a violation of beliefs. In other words, thou shalt not kill. If you kill, then it's a moral violation of your beliefs. Soul injury is different, based on unmourned loss, unforgiven guilt, and shame. And so what Opus Peace is doing, and I am part of this movement, Opus Peace is translating lessons learned from people who were trained to go to war to help veterans and other populations learn how to live in peace. Wow, is it powerful stuff? So you don't have to be a combat veteran to, okay, the lady that you know that was sexually assaulted, she more than likely has a soul injury. Has she grieved her loss? Has she forgiven herself when she was powerless? Has she been willing to forgive the perpetrator? So people who have been sexually assaulted, people who've gone through divorce, people who are being retaliated against because being whistleblowers, there's a lot of loss surrounding that, right? I mean, so many populations can benefit from these lessons.
Yeah, you need to send me that so I can share it whenever I put the recording on social media.
If you go to my website, under resources, there's stuff in there about soul injury. Okay. Use whatever you want there. But there's a ceremony that Deborah Grassman, an advanced practice nurse, hospice nurse, created. She's actually the founder. They are the founder of the We Honor Veterans movement that goes on in hospices all over the country, right? So this Fallen Comrades Ceremony, it's a beautiful thing. It's for communities. And what happens is you come to a ceremony that's been very carefully scripted, fashioned after American Native rituals of welcoming warriors home. You know, we don't have anything like that in our society. No. You know, we just, you know, one day you're in Iraq being a trigger puller. The next day you're home trying to figure out who you are and where to live and who's going to be your friend, right? So the Fallen Comrades Ceremony is an hour-and-a-half ceremony that provides a safe sanctuary where veterans and their families can come and acknowledge burdens that they carry from military service. You don't have to have been a combat veteran, okay? Maybe you were supporting a dangerous duty assignment, or people like me who lived in 20 communities before the age of 35. That's a lot of losses. You know, you've experienced a lot of losses in your career. Have you been to combat?
No.
Okay, but you've still had a lot of losses, right? And so this ceremony is about acknowledging those losses. A veteran and a family member offers a testimony. There are rocks that veterans and family members can write a burden on. You take it to the front of the room, and then the community. The beautiful part about this is that the community can come learn firsthand from someone who has overcome a soul injury, and they can pick up a rock and take the rock home, pray on it, put it on their desk, put it in the garden as a symbolic representation of, I am sharing in the burdens and sacrifices that you as a living military member, veteran, carry with you because of your willingness to protect and defend freedom. So it's a shared responsibility and just a very moving experience. And if anybody who's listening wants to learn more or contact me about anything I've talked about, please let me know. My email address is Kathy with a K at vanguardveteran.com. It's singular, not plural. Kathy at vanguardveteran.com.
Now, what is your website?
Vanguardveteran.com.
Oh, I thought that it was the email. So do you say the email as well?
It's, yeah, my domain name is Vanguard Veteran. So my email is Kathy at vanguardveteran.com, and my website is vanguardveteran.com. All kinds of resources on there, a blog. You can see a videotape of a Fallen Comrades Ceremony if you want to see what that's like.
That would be nice.
all kinds of soul injury references. I really like the one sheet I developed. It says, what to say to a veteran who's struggling, how to help a veteran or anybody really get more in touch with their pain instead of stuffing their pains. I kind of referred to this earlier, Deliris, and that is that, we veterans are so stoic, right? It's really hard for us to ask for help.
Yes.
It's really hard, I think, probably even for guys more so than women. It's really hard for them, to reach out and establish a support network. And so many of us are just so afraid of our emotional pain. Us being society in general, we're not taught how to deal with our emotional pain. It's not something we learn. And
but
so
you know what? That's in law enforcement too, first responders.
Yes,
so it's kind of like I get it on both sides.
Yes, you get you get a double whammy.
Yeah, I do.
You get a double whammy, right?
It's like my entire life.
Yeah, and then as a woman, right,
Yep.
you have additional challenges, and as a minority, it gets even more complicated. So
Yes.
I congratulate you for having a coach and figuring out, being intentional on who you want to be and how you want to be, because you've done that inner reflection and gone through that inside job to understand who you are and what you want. Not easy.
Well, it was painful. It was painful because, for the longest time, you have been part of something, and that's something, for some reason betrayed you. I don't understand the answer, but, it's kind of like, especially like officers, we have in that position, we're in that position that, a lot of people think that you're showing weakness. It's not weakness, it's humbleness, So, but I'm really glad that we had this seminar. I'm really interested on that, soul injury and the ceremony, my 50th birthday is coming up.
Ooh.
So I'm kind of like thinking, what am I going to do? So,
well, bringing a Fallen Comrades Ceremony to your community, because you have so many soldiers there, an active duty population, and
I'll look into it.
It is so moving.
Okay.
And it's a great way to let the community know about your LLC or any other great organization doing good things in the community. The primary reason is to help veterans and their families heal. We could include first responders because it's all the same thing, know.
Yeah. Well, you know that we had that shooting in El Paso back in August 2019. We had a massacre. Is that how you say it? Massacre?
Massacre.
And, it was terrible. There's a lot of soul injuries in the community. Not necessarily veterans or military personnel, but a lot of, just regular John Doe citizen and first responders, nurses.
Well, and based on what we've just been through the pandemic, right? You're fostering more isolation, right? And more, healthcare providers. Opus Peace provides soul restoration workshops for healthcare providers. So, none of us are immune to our emotional pain. We all experience it. It's just part of life. Yes. But the bad news is we don't pay attention to it. We numb it. We numb it with alcohol and drugs. Okay. Yes. And we don't, because oftentimes we're more afraid of the emotional pain than we are actually the reality of experiencing it, right? We're more afraid, we're too afraid to experience it. But once you do experience it, it's like, well, I can do this, and for me, it's just all about crying. I cry to release my emotional pain and to, in Deborah's words, re-own, rehome, and revitalize your soul and to get more joy out of life. Because if you carry around all that pain and you're stuffing it and you're numbing it, you're not really living life.
True.
you know?
But remember, that's how we're trained. That's how we're
is.
taught. I mean, that's how our brains function. You know, it's like you said it earlier, you know, it's hard for us to seek out, you know, or look for help, you know.
Yes. And it's not just hard for people who've served in the military.
No, it's humans.
It's hard for us humans. So, you know, I'm a proponent of, you know, digging deep to figure out who you are and focusing on personal growth and leadership development. I ascribe to John Maxwell's tenets of leadership.
I saw that.
Yes. So I'm a speaker, trainer, and coach for John Maxwell. I love his philosophies and his approach. He's just, he's right on. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less.
Yep.
Bingo, right? It's not based on position. It's based on interpersonal skills and desire to serve others. That's what you're doing in your life. Good job, right?
Thank you.
So, no, good job. So dig deep to figure out who you are, because when you can't give what you don't have, right? So if you develop yourself, then you can give more to other people, make the world a better place. John says 5% of leaders are really good leaders. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that give you some perspective, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so dig deep to figure out what your purpose is, what legacy do you want to leave? And then also dig deep to be willing to experience your emotional pain so that we can have more joy and more love in our life. And it's you know, it's a personal journey. It's a personal journey, and not an easy one.
Nope.
Not an easy one. So having a coach is a great idea.
Well, it took me a while to decide to get a coach, right? Because, you know, the expense of it, I mean, it's not cheap, but I think that I have, like, because I'm very, how you say, I'm very focus oriented, you know, and with all this bazooka, I call it, came over me, you know, my mind was like all over the place.
Yeah.
So I needed someone to kind of like get me back on track, you know, on my purpose and, you know, what the end result was.
So let's talk about the expense. Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is something that I think personal coaches are much more appreciated. I think certainly during COVID that personal coaches have become more recognized as a valuable tool. But for veterans, right, I sense sort of lack of awareness and maybe even an unwillingness to invest in ourselves in that way. What a disservice, okay? Again, John teaches that we should spend 10% of our resources on our own personal growth. You know, if you're a person of faith, you know, that's what we're taught in our worship, places of worship. But, you know, no one is going to help you figure out who you are and what's going to make you happy and how to make a difference in life and how best to live your life. That's a gift you can give yourself, but that only comes from an investment of time, talent, and treasure, right? It doesn't happen any other way. No one's going to give it to you. You have to figure it out yourself.
Yep. And nobody had written the book either.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed this session. I really appreciated that you took the time to address our community, you know, because even though, you know, it's Vanguard Veteran, I think that a lot of first responders are veterans too. Yeah. So they kind of like are dual.
Absolutely. Well, and so, if you would, I would like to post this on my YouTube channel.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And provide a link to it on LinkedIn. So I don't know, you think you have to send it to me via Dropbox or something, right?
Yes, I do. And I'll do that after,
Thank you.
It takes a couple of minutes to kind of like download, and then I can send it to you and you can download it.
Well, I appreciate you being an advocate for veterans, an advocate for minorities, right? And an advocate for the American way of life. I'm hearing you do all those things. So go out there and cultivate those veteran champions and let me know how you and I can partner. I would love to offer a mastermind to any transitioning veterans about personal growth John has a great mastermind on that, and I think it's very helpful for veterans, if not anybody. Love to explore the possibility of doing a Fallen Comrades Ceremony, and or you know, maybe establishing a veteran connection ministry within your place of worship, talking to your clergy and asking them, you know, what more maybe could they do to support veterans. And there's some great stuff on my website that might help jumpstart your thinking in that area.
Awesome. Well, you have a good day.
Thank you.
I really, really, really thank you for your time and everything that you brought up to the table, because I think that the only way that we can make a better community is educating others, you know.
And sticking our neck out and asking people to get involved.
Yes.
Not being afraid to make that ask very respectfully, because a lot of civilians are doing a lot of great things for us. But you know what? Having been at war for more than 2 decades has created more and more needs for those who are serving, those who have served, and their families. And there are a lot of caregivers in our communities who are caring for wounded warriors that certainly need and welcome a helping hand.
Yes, I agree.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, have a good day.
You too. I appreciate this so much.
Thank you. Till next time.
Keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.